a Quaker. Is that right?
Yeah, although I haven't been to a meeting very much here in Wellington because it was very difficult to do so when I was a minister. And even as a politician, because you go into meeting and people see you not as a Quaker but as a politician.
Yeah.
And they line up with a whole lot of
issues.
Absolutely, they questions, yeah, absolutely. They lobby furiously.
Yeah. I've always thought if I was going to be religious, Quakerism would be the good way to go.
Wasn't Nixon a Quaker?
Yes, he was. Brought up as a Quaker, yeah.
Okay. Is the clipboard in the shot, or should I keep it close?
It's fine, it's fine.
All right. Now I might skip around a bit.
That's all right.
It might not make a lot of sense, the order of questions. I'm just,
Okay.
So, keeping in mind that this film's being made for Americans not familiar with New Zealand politics,
right.
Typically, could you briefly explain what the Labour Party is and what its major policies are?
The Labour Party is a social democratic party, part of that group that you'd come out of Europe, equivalent to the Labour Party in England, Labour Party in Australia, social democratic parties in the Nordic countries. It believes very strongly that there is good in everyone and that everyone should have the chance to live and achieve as best as they can. That means that you won't leave people or the market to make decisions, and you will intervene. That means that you won't leave the market to provide all your airlines or your infrastructure, particularly in a small country. So you will provide roading and rail and port policies and things like that. On the other hand, it doesn't mean that you're not about trying to have an intelligent and smart population and raise the level of ability of everyone. Most of our schools are state-owned. Only 3% are private. Most of our hospitals are state-owned. And even the private schools, by the way, there is a considerable contribution made by the state. So that gives you a flavour for it.
Okay. So you're elected as an electorate MP, correct?
Yes, I am.
In practice, is there any real difference, and in pragmatic terms, in the day-to-day work of an electorate MP and a list MP?
Yes, it can be. I was a list MP for my first 3 years in Parliament. For the last 9 years I have been an electorate member for Wellington Central, where we are right now. When I was a list MP, if something happened in Marlborough where I was working and I had an office over there, it really was the right of the constituency MP. If there's a fire or a devastation, they would be there on the spot, and you expect them to be there. So there is that sense of responsibility that you play as a constituency MP that you don't have as a list MP. Some list MPs, depends how the party uses them, will use their representation, for instance, to work with a certain ethnic group, or will use their representation, use the fact that they're a list MP to actually have them doing, as does the Deputy Prime Minister, almost no constituency work, but he does an amazing amount of a very heavy load of cabinet work, or the Speaker of the House. So you play it around. Yes, they are quite different roles.
One of the things that I noticed, and this isn't true for all the parties, but let's say that you're a Labour supporter in a national safe seat, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. Do people often go to list MPs with offices in the district?
Yes, they did. They did for me. Yeah. I was a Labour MP. I had an office. I was a list MP. I had an office in Blenheim, which the seat was held by the National Party. I went to see the National Party MP at the time and said, "Listen, let's make a commitment. But we're both short of time. But if a man comes to see me and he's been to see you, and he wants a case sorted with a government department, the person he goes to first is the person who takes the case. We don't both take the case and drive the minister mad, all right? On the other hand, then there's people who come to lobby, and they might be coming to lobby on behalf of the wine industry. Sure, they'll lobby the National, and they'll lobby Labour, and they'll lobby Greens. They'll lobby everyone, and that's their right. But it's just when they're taking up a case with a government department that just one of us take it up. And we ran this agreement, and it worked very fine.
Okay. Do you think well, you mentioned lobbyists. Under MMP compared to first past the post, do lobbyists have to do more legwork?
I would imagine they do, because in first past the post, they really only had two parties that they lobbied. Now they realise the importance of the smaller parties. And also it's a moving feast. We compromise. We have to compromise in order to get legislation through the House. So they have to keep very, very much abreast of a piece of legislation and see all the compromises coming through and get in very quickly to make their views known. Yes, I think they are working much harder.
This may seem a little bit broad, so if
That's
it's
right.
if it's too broad, just let me know. Can you name the most success, the greatest success that you've had in office that would not have happened with MMP, and the worst moment for you that would not have happened with MMP if they hadn't switched to MMP?
If we hadn't switched, so the best thing that's happened under MMP that couldn't have happened under first past the post. Gosh, heavens, that is quite hard. Largely because my brain is just not operating. There's a piece of legislation that we're dealing with right now called waste. It is about waste, and we haven't got through to the end part of it yet. But because it was introduced by the Greens, because of MMP and we need their support, that's we being the Labour government, we decided to work with them on that legislation. So this is not my idea, but it actually works in very well. The Ministry for the Environment was actually doing some work on this. The Greens initiative meant that we took that up one step further and put a lot of work into it and have amended it on the way with their agreement. At the same time, the National Party is working very closely too, because they can see us working together and changing and amending and it being very open, and the government finally adopting the legislation. I think that that piece of legislation will actually could not have been possible under first past the post, mainly because a minority party had it as a priority. It may not have been a priority for either governing party, but because they pushed it, we're obliged to support them. We've put the effort in, so it's actually up there on the ladder and it's working. That's an example of something that might not have got ahead, and something that failed because of MMP. Yes, I had nothing to do with this bill, but it was a therapeutic medicines bill, which was the union to do with alternative medicines between Australia and New Zealand. That bill totally failed. We thought sometimes you can get the two big parties, National and Labour, agreeing, and then the little parties are irrelevant. And I think that we had thought that agreement was there because National had made a commitment to the Australians. They, for reasons of politics, pulled back from it, and we just didn't have the support. It's basically being a minority government.
Okay, so do you think it's provided more of a check on?
Oh, yeah, you bet it has. Absolutely, it has, and that's actually its value. It's marvellous, and also having to compromise is really good. Sometimes it drives you demented. I know when I was a minister, you see, and it really can drive you demented. Because you'll compromise because almost out of populism. And I'm a very rational being. Have I just moved out of your space of life? Sorry, Deb. I'm a very rational politician, and so I take an argument and I work it through. But I'm dependent on a small party who may not be particularly rational in their approach, not exposed to all the argument that's gone on in the government department. Say something out there which gets a lot of popular response, and bingo, you have to actually make a compromise, which isn't going to necessarily work in the end. It's really hard. But that's the old rationalist talking.
So let's go back to the Greens a little bit, because they're granted the official coalition is Labour, United Future, and New Zealand First,
Yeah.
but
The Greens are our partners.
yeah.
And often give us, if we're having trouble with if one of the parties isn't on side with us, we actually need the Greens. So it's very interesting because we've got parties. If you draw it along the line, Progressive, which is part of the coalition anyway, and Greens are on the left, and then there's us, and then there's United and New Zealand First in the middle, and then there's National, and then there's and there's Māori Party in the middle as well. And so we sometimes move that way, and sometimes we move that way, trying to find our support either way.
But you can't pass anything that doesn't have at least what you would assume is the representatives of 50% of the people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you think that having parties to the left of Labour on many issues, and by this I mean the Greens and to some extent Jim Anderson and the Progressives, do you think it's freed Labour to move around a bit in its positioning?
Oh yes, it does. It frees us to, well, it frees us. We'll still come down with a policy which will be probably left of centre, okay, centre left. We'll come down with that policy, but depending on who's going to support us, we'll move to the right or to the left, in bits of it, not in a whole lot of it. And if we have to compromise too far, then the bill won't go ahead, like the therapeutics one.
Okay. Do you think people are still as skeptical as they were in the 1980s and the early 1990s in the political process?
Yes, I think they're even more so, but it's not to do with MMP. It's very much to do, I mean, one of the sad things about us is that we are very much a Westminster system, which is adversarial. It's not inquisitorial, it's not about finding solutions, it's adversarial. MMP has softened us a little bit into working with the small parties, and that's been good. But out there it's portrayed by media, it's portrayed as the two giants yelling at each other in the House. The two front benches sit 2.5 sword lengths apart from each other. That's how it's described, and under the Westminster model. And it's, I think that adversarial model really annoys the public. The media, however, want to show a scrap because that sells the story, and so on it goes. And I think it's been extremely sad. It's in our court system as well. It's very sad. It's,
well, shouldn't politics be a little bit adversarial?
Yes, it'll be adversarial, but when that adversarial nature means that you don't compromise, when you don't listen to each other, when you don't actually seek to work together to solve a problem, it becomes a waste of space. Most people in their ordinary daily lives don't fight for the sake of fighting. They try to solve a problem, and people can't see why that can't be applied to our system. I think that MMP has forced us a little bit along that way, particularly behind the scenes. In select committee work, like your congressional committees, there is a saying, good working to find a solution, much better than normally the material you see in the House. But the other thing is, I can't stand ad hominem argument, and that's what often is portrayed of Parliament. Question time, which if you've been to question time is like a bear pit. Questions neither give answers nor educate anybody. It's just a very bad piece of drama.
A lot of people in the United States actually think that there should be something like question time in the United States. Do you believe that that the idea is sound?
I like what you have, and I've always liked it, your congressional committee systems when you do inquiries. And my memories probably go back to the 1970s, but I sat in on a couple of committees and I was incredibly impressed. Our committees at that stage didn't have the power to do inquiries. Now they do, and it still impresses me when we do it too. And I find that sort of work is good work. The question times that we have are really, it is about theatre. And I suppose you're talking to someone, I remember being told, Marion, please don't give such long answers. They're not going to take a test. Keep it simple. Yes, no, maybe. Sit down, you know. Well, that's not about actually, as a population in America might think, about giving information across. It's about a contest between two sides.
Do you think that with the advent of the internet, a lot of politicians, not here in New Zealand, with the exception of I think Rodney Hyde and a few other people, they're coming out with blogs that anybody can access, and they can write as long as they want on any sort of policies they want. Do you think that that's going to...
I think it's having a huge effect on us right now, actually. And although I, as a politician, don't write a blog, although some of the younger ones coming into the party do, I access them. I access the blogs. I read them. The information goes all around. I look at the arguments get put up. You bet I read the blogs, and I feed information into the blogs and to the blog writers, because I believe there is a whole group of people who are finding that a good way of getting information. You could look, after a while you begin to know this person argues this way, and you make your own subtraction. You know how they argue. This person's kind of left-wing, is always going to have that opinion on wars. This one is going to actually be quite solid and give us lots of reference materials, you know, links to things. I just find it superb. I love it. I'm watching at the moment some interesting stuff. Well, some of it drives me mad because it's a wee bit juvenile. On your American, you know, the primaries that are going on at the moment, and it's a sort of care thing or something. Somebody gave me that called, oh dear. Anyway, it's obviously quite. I think it must be very much in favour of Obama. It just must be, but never mind. It's good.
It's actually kind of strange because a lot of the internet support tends not to go to the candidates. Well, now I'm answering that question.
Yep.
I'll talk about.
Yep.
You know,
Right.
Do you have any favorite New Zealand bloggers?
Yes, I do. Public Address, actually, and I have for ages, years and years and years. His is the first one. I read. I have a look at David Farrar on occasion. I can't think of his name of his blog.
Kiwi blog.
Yeah, I have a look at that because I like to know what he's thinking and what he's found out. I go over to Jordan Carter's one on the other side, and then I just hit around a variety of others. And I just have ones on the side. I go into Scoop and hit down their sign of good blogs, or to Public Addresses ones and sit down. So I just every now and then pick them up, have a look, read.
Okay. So, skipping around a bit, do you think MMP has made politicians more accountable?
No, I don't think so. I think it's made us work better to get something turned into legislation or a policy.
Sorry, just because of that noise, would you mind starting the
right,
the answer again? Thank
Yep.
you.
Sorry, that's the statistics department sending something through. The question no, I don't think it has made us more accountable. I think it has made us work better together to find a solution that the majority will agree to. But I don't think it's necessarily made more accountable. Accountability comes out of transparency and openness. Maybe that has improved because you'll have small parties asking questions from their perspective and getting information out that might not normally be out there. Remember, we've got all the ability. Oral questions are just the froth on the top. The written questions that get put in can elicit a lot of information. So a small party like the Greens, trying to go down one area to do with energy use can ask a whole lot of written questions that have to be answered by the minister. And they're going out there with information that might not have been asked before. And that's good.
So, when people vote in MMP for their party vote, which is the one that really determines the makeup of Parliament, do you think they're voting more for the people in the party or the policies of the party?
I think they're voting for the policies of the party, and that's been much better, in my opinion, because they're very clearly saying in the last election here in Wellington Central, which is a public service town, it was quite clear the debates that I was involved in, and I have something like 60 street corner meetings, 30 cottage meetings, about 30 public meetings. And so you get a feel for the themes coming through. It was between tax cuts for the individuals versus public service for all. This is a public service town. So it was very interesting, that debate.
Do you think campaigning's changed under MMP?
Yes, it has, because before you read on the personality of the candidate, and you argued things about, you were selling Marion Hobbs out there. Now you're selling very strongly policies. That's one thing. Secondly, you used to say there are some seats that are always winnable, and you just think about winning by 20, winning by 200, those sorts of things. It was whether you won or you didn't. Here it's about what number of party votes, so that you might have a seat. If you were the National Party looking on Wellington Central, where I've got a majority of 6,000, they can still pick up 10,000 votes for the National Party. I might pick up 14, 15, 16,000 votes for Labour, more than that, 18,000 votes for Labour. But that 10,000 votes for National is still important. So they can't walk away. You can't walk away from any seat. The other thing is what we call the enrolled non-vote. We have that concept, we have to enroll. We don't have to vote. So a number of people are enrolled and they don't vote. And it amounts to, I think, something like over 600,000 New Zealanders did not vote. They were on the roll and they did not vote. So we have to identify those and get out and get them to vote, because you want them to vote for Labour.
Okay. Do you think MMP, other than through the normal, how government affects everyone, but do you think MMP has affected New Zealanders who don't follow politics or current events?
Yes, I think it has, because you used to, if you lived, when I grew up, I don't think I was ever in a Labour seat. I was always in a National seat. And I used to think my vote didn't count. Now you know your vote does count. And when we've had close elections, people, they begin to realise it does count and it can make a difference, because I think we used to think that the parties were quite the same. I think now you've begun to see there's quite a difference between the parties.
Speaking of differences between the parties, do you think that there is a larger gulf between the left and right banks, if you will, of Labour and National than there is between the centre left and left banks of Labour and the Greens?
I think there is a bigger gap between the left and the right, absolutely, on a number of issues. Foreign policy, personal taxation versus community spend, environmental issues, social issues as regards people at the very bottom of the heap. How far do you let them fall? Picking them up, getting people involved in community. So there's a huge difference. But basically it comes down to individual versus community, really. And there's a very strong individualist, very strong, particularly among 30 and 40-year-olds, grew up in the 1990s when that was really strong, versus the communal movement.
And
sorry, could I just change the tape?
Minister of Foreign Affairs, and you'd have people come in from overseas, and the 17th floor is above the buildings, so you can see into the water, and it's just gorgeous. You see it right out to the heads of the harbour. Straight. It's a beautiful city.
I'm recording you.
Oh, okay. So what was? Do you remember the last question I asked? It's okay. We can continue. Oh yeah. How did MMP affect? And then we went into Labour and the Greens. So there's no chance that you could see under the current political climate, unless there was a radical shift in one of the major parties, of anything like Germany's major coalition.
No, I doubt it. I really would doubt it very strongly. I would have thought that was very much more an FPP thing, actually, than, which is different because Germany is MMP. But I would have thought that was more likely then than now, because always then you were reaching into the middle to garner power and support. Now you are more clearly defined.
Well, that's an interesting thing. So do you think that the policies that have been acted since MMP have been more or less centrist, or?
They're centre, but they're centre to left. But I certainly that's my feeling of it inside our party. Our party could switch to centre to right, but I'm on the policy council of our party. I'm senior vice president, so no, I think that we are centre to left, largely environmental issues coming through quite strongly, but issues around social justice, child poverty.
Let me just check to see. Were you there? I'm sorry, I don't have the information, but were you there in 1996?
Yes, that's when I came in.
You came in 1996, the
first year.
MMP election. Did you get what was your impression? Did you feel that people kind of had a handle on this and that they should go forward, or were people kind of like, what are these 20 new people doing here?
Oh, it was weird. And I remember I was a list MP. I'd been a principal of a high school and was used to still working about an 80-hour week, and we came in for the first 6 weeks and we did nothing because they were negotiating whether New Zealand First went with the National Party or whether it went with the Labour Party. And so it was all happening above our heads, and we just twiddled our thumbs and didn't really know what to do, and hadn't quite worked out what the role of the list MP was, except I said, okay, I had stood in the electorate of Kaikoura. Okay, Marion, you go and set up an office in Kaikoura. We did everything. We were making it up as we went along, and we've continued to do so. There are things that we've learnt then that we don't now do. We've learnt not to actually always have a list MP put in one electorate by themselves. We've learnt to put them in hubs and all sorts of different ways that we've learnt of managing things. And we never ever made the mistake when Helen won the majority, when we did, Labour, in 1999, of taking 6 weeks to actually get, because the public got really cross and thought this is MMP. Mind you, they also quite enjoy not having a government. To a certain degree.
So you were
Spazi anarchist and everyone.
You were a high school principal.
Mm-hmm.
How does that compare to being an MP?
Oh God! I'm going to go back to be a high school principal, I hope, as I retire next year, but not in New Zealand. How does it compare? Well, the work for a while, the work was nowhere near as hard. Secondly, when you're a high school principal, you're leading a team of 120, and now I found myself at the bottom of a team of 120. That wasn't a team. It wasn't until I became a minister that I got anywhere near the same kind of ability to have an idea and take it through and implement it. Otherwise, you're a cog in a wheel.
Okay, so your problem? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, was this hearing you? Okay.
Very different job.
How much influence would you say that third parties have in MMP?
Quite a considerable amount. They don't have the opportunity as much as the majority party has of initiating an idea and seeing it through, because they get limited. They put up their 5 or 6 pet projects and get those through, but we're doing an enormous amount across a huge lot of portfolios, so that they don't get that opportunity all the time. But they can force compromise, and that's okay. That's all right. They can also force you to take a second look at something. That's why I see as quite valuable, even though it was extraordinarily frustrating at times.
There it is. So would you say that the influence that third parties have is proportional to their numbers?
I think it's higher than their numbers, yeah. I think it's a bigger influence. And it even comes out at the moment, when we've got a slight disintegration, where we've got one person, we've got 2 people, one who's split away from United Future, one who's split away from us, acting as 2 individuals. They have an inordinate amount of power. We've only got a combined majority of 1 when we combine in all the little parties. So one person walks away. So there's the effect of that happens on your own party in terms of discipline and in terms of freedom of movement.
You're talking about Gordon Copeland leaving United Future, right?
And Philip Field from Labour. So our vote has gone from 50 to 49, and then we always have to. Sometimes Philip will vote with us, and sometimes against us. And so that one has an inordinate amount of power compared with what that person had as one in a member of a caucus of 50.
So, how do you feel about the waka jumping
I get very angry with it because you're voted in not as an individual. You are really voted in as a member of a team. It's something like the impact is, I think we had this discussion the other day at New Zealand Council. I think it's about 90% of your vote is really because of the party you belong to, not you, the individual. And so when the individual walks away, and therefore takes away the opportunity for the party to put its policy into practice, I want to get very cross.
Well, that's another thing. It's something to say that if a person was an electorate MP and then they left the party, became an independent,
yeah,
they at least have...
They have that electorate part, but when they're a list MP, that's even worse. But even in the electorate MP, you have behind you all, you know, if I stood as Marion Hobbs here in Wellington Central, I would not get the vote I get as Marion Hobbs Labour Party. Okay, it's a very different thing.
Is there anything you'd like to particularly say about Gordon Copeland? I'm not trying to...
No. I just think, I mean, in a way I feel pretty sorry for him because an awful lot, he gets quite a lot of publicity, and it can go positive or negative, and you can get an inflated sense of your own importance. And then when it comes to the vote, you might just disappear off the face of the earth, and that's, I think, is a pretty hard thing for a person to face.
Do you think that's going to happen next year?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What about United Future? Do you think that they're...
They are led by Peter Dunn. Peter Dunn has almost a stranglehold on that seat of Harry or Belmont. Okay. So because he has a seat, the party will survive.
Do you think that they'll get split the party vote, though?
Gordon Copeland? No, I don't think so. No, unless I haven't yet seen if they manage to form a really strong party amongst the various Christian groups. They might, but there hasn't been a history of that yet in New Zealand. It hasn't been successful. It hasn't been big enough numbers. Very different from the United States.
Are you familiar with the book Unbridled Power, Later Bridled Power?
Mm-hmm.
Did you read that?
God, it's a long time ago. But go for it.
Well, basically, I wanted to know when did you read that and what did you think of it?
I probably read it when I read it in the 1990s, I think. That's when it was written, wasn't it? Mid-1990s. I was still at that stage of principal. Oh, yeah, it was written early 90s. I was still a principal, and yes, I did it. I work on a committee called the Regulations Review Select Committee. We have certain levels of legislation. There's legislation that goes through the House, primary legislation. It has inside each piece of legislation the ability for the minister to make rules or regulations. Those regulations must come to select committee. Those are the regulations that set the speed limit, that tell you how fast you can tow a car, all the things that drive ordinary people mad. Those regulations don't come through Parliament. They only go through a select committee. Now, why I happen to like Unbridled Power is it talks about the ability, it tries to put a bridle on us getting into every corner of people's lives without giving people the opportunity to have their say about that. And it also talks about the huge power that executive has over Parliament. It still has that. It still does have an enormous power over Parliament. Do you understand how? Do you want me to explain? Cabinet?
Well, I understand, but maybe for the audience. So.
Yeah. Do you want me to? Yeah. But so you take a party like Labour Party, which has 50, did have 50 members of the party in its caucus, and you put in a cabinet of 26, 27, 28. Okay. In cabinet, they have a discussion, they make up their mind on a cabinet paper coming through, and they then take it to caucus. There are 28 people bound by collective responsibility. They cannot break from that in front of caucus. They already have a vote, 28 in favour. That's what you mean about the ability of a cabinet, the executive, to actually dominate Parliament. And then, of course, that's in the caucus that has the power, 50. Now, 50 is not, however, a majority of 120, and that is where working with other parties has slightly lessened that executive power, but not totally taken it away.
So, under first past the post, almost by necessity, there would be a majority, not just of the cabinet would have such a large power over caucus, and caucus would have the majority of Parliament. Thus,
that's the unbridled power.
So, what did you think of MMP when you first heard of it being proposed in New Zealand?
I wanted, was it STV? It was one in between, SMP or STV. I didn't necessarily want MMP, but I did want, I didn't want first past the post, but I wanted a different model from the one we got.
You said your first year was 1996.
Yes.
Was that the first year you ran?
Yes. Oh, no, I ran in a by-election in 1993. Under first past the post.
Do you think you would have ran? Well, yeah, I guess you would have ran because at that time would you have ran if the referendum in 1993 wasn't on the table?
Yes, I probably would have, because I was interested in politics. It would have been a jolly sight harder to get in, because one of the things the MMP has done is allowed through the list for us to bring in people. More women have come in, considerably more women, and different ethnic minorities.
It is kind of interesting that the last two prime ministers, the current one and Jenny Shipley, both women.
That's right.
Not that you'd have to.
Yeah.
You could probably guess by the name Jenny, but yeah.
Yep.
Sorry. Do you think that Helen Clark was in the Labour Party and rose through the ranks? Do you think that would have happened under first past the post, though?
Yes, she would have always been, in the end, been leader. That once she's in, it's getting selected that's difficult. And yes, she would have always come through, as did Jenny Shipley, under first past the post. But it was actually getting the momentum of women in. The fact that I think we have a third now of our caucus of women. I can't actually pull out the numbers. And just recently we've got far bigger increase in cabinet than we had. But Norway does much better than us. The Swedes do much better than us. So we've got a wee way to go.
Okay. Do you think that that MMP has increased diversity in Parliament?
Yes, it has, absolutely. I mean, the fact that we have Chinese, Pakistani, we have more Maori. You would still find it very difficult, and it'll be very unusual. There's not very many Maori standing in a general seat. They're either on the list or they're off a Maori seat. And also Pacific Island. We have 3 Pacific Island, 4 actually.
Do you think that Labour wanted to form an alliance with the Greens, but just it wasn't politically possible the way that the votes?
Wasn't politically possible. There was the possibility was Labour, Greens, and Maori Party. Remember, Maori Party was led by someone who was pretty angry with us, and we didn't think that necessarily we would be able to pull that off and have it dependable. That's nothing about the Maori Party. That's just that it was a brand new party, and whether they would actually always be there to cast their vote, it was just too close to call. And so they went the way of going New Zealand First United, which made it very uncomfortable for the Greens.
Where are you on the list today? Or 2005 rather?
Yes, I was, but I can't remember. I was probably about 15th, because I was in cabinet. It goes in order of your cabinet position, 15th or 14th or 13th, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think that what do you think about? Well, I call them celebrity MPs. Geoffrey Palmer actually disagreed with me for calling them that, but they're we're talking. I don't know if there's anybody in Labour, but we're talking about people like Dr. Donald Brash, who was brought in for his expertise but he would probably not have won, or he probably would have not been a successful career politician. And he was brought in at number 5, I believe.
No, we
practically.
did that. We did that with Margaret Wilson. She had been leader of the party, president of the party. She was a law professor. We were not desperate, but we wanted some more lawyers and lawyers of high ability, and we put her in quite high on the list. Yes, we have. You do actually go out there and say, there is a certain skill. I look around the caucus. I mean, I'm very conscious of this. I'm in the middle of the moment of selecting the new candidates for the next election. And as we're going through, I'm saying, what are we missing? What skills are we missing? When it comes to making the list, if there's a noted gap, we'll be going out and tapping people on the shoulder and asking them to apply. Yes, absolutely.
So I need to go back to that, your experiences with making the list, but also the do you think that people talk about how if you were high enough on national labor, there's no way effectively, if people are angry with you, to vote you out? For example, let's say that for some reason, as a large hypothetical, people got angry at Michael Cullen, who is number 2, I believe,
right,
Deputy Prime Minister. Let's say that for some reason aliens abducted him and forced him to electrocute Oprah on television. Everybody doesn't like him, but it's too late to change the list, and he's still number 2. He's still going to get in,
yeah,
under that system. But we also had under First Past the Post the problem of safe seats. Do you think voter dissatisfaction...
It's the same thing. It is very much the same thing. You're high on the list and it's like a safe seat. But then, if you had somebody who really got up the noses of people and they were high up in the list, the party would suffer. You'd see the party would not get the votes. Is this the list you're putting up and you've got that person in there? What does that say about you? So you've got to be very careful about the kind and quality of person you put in there on the list.
So we have I think that problem. The Democratic Party has that problem with a guy named I think his name is William Jefferson, or
right,
I can't remember. Not Clinton, but the other guy, the guy who was found with with money stocked in his freezer back in Louisiana, and there was a primary, and it was a safe Democratic seat.
Yeah.
There was a primary, and the challenger lost, and he got back into Congress and ended up, it's something that the Republicans can hold over the Democrats.
That's right.
Under MMP, you think that person would be likely more...
The next time round, they'll be gone. They might make it through. It is very hard. I mean, we have had problems, and we have taken people off. Or did it happen as there have been times when as we were making the list when we've removed candidates, and there was somebody arrived in one party, I think it was United, and they found that the person had not been a New Zealand citizen at the time, got removed, had to go. So yeah, it's not a total guarantee that you'll survive forever, or even survive for the process of from the time you got put on the list to the time you get into Parliament.
I'm actually familiar with that.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking about running myself for Prime Minister under the McGillicuddy Serious Party. Any party can give you politicians that are incompetent. Only one can give you someone completely ineligible.
They're the one great joy of McGillicuddy's. I haven't had the McGillicuddy's up against me for ages. I used to have a crazy one in 1999. See, in 1999, when I stood for Wellington Central, I had the joy of removing the leader of the ACT Party, and that was their only seat. So they went, it's like sort of Peter Dunn. However, they have won a seat back, you see.
Yeah. So tell me about the McGillicuddy campaigns that you've been running against.
They always bring a joy. They have when you're running, and Wellington Central is slightly different because we have so many public meetings, and one of them is in the Aro Valley, and everyone's all crowded into this little community hall, hanging out through the windows, and yelling and yahooing. So the McGillicuddies will come in, and they'll be dressed outlandishly and they'll let off firecrackers and do all sorts of things which will cause disorder. But every now and then, in the midst of all the laughter, will come a gem of something that's really quite pertinent, and that will touch through to a lot of people's hearts, and there'll be an uproar. So you've got to be very careful. You don't dismiss them at all, and you kind of engage, and nor do you get offended by them, but you listen hard, because sometimes they're saying things that out there are really felt by people.
And
don't ignore it.
And McGillicuddy Series, they've pretty much disbanded at this point, correct?
I think so. I haven't seen them for a while.
Do you think that has to do with MMP? That
No, I think it's to do with most of the McGillicuddy series have probably got babies and mortgages.
Well, I mean, there is the whole idea that part of the comedy party, a part of the value of a comedy party is that if you don't feel like voting for, person number one, it's sort of like a none of the above vote.
That's right. That's right, and that's okay too. Although it's being one of the ones that's always out trying to get your vote, I suppose it isn't, but it still has people involved in politics. It still has people involved in debating some of the issues, and you don't dismiss them.
So that's about it for me.
I've got a few questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Go for it.
And I'll ask you to direct your questions to Brian just for the camera's sake.
Okay, dear.
First of all, do you think the repeal of Section 59 would have gone through without the Greens? Would that ever have happened with Labour Party alone?
Yes, I think, yes. It actually was our policy to repeal Section 59. We may have handled it a bit differently. However, so the Greens started it, although it wasn't our policy thing. The Greens started it, and we had to work with them and probably do a bit of a rescue towards the end, because this is a very honest observation. When you are in a minority party, you can remain very pure. You don't compromise as much. You force compromises of the others, so you can remain very pure. Whereas we have to, as one of the larger parties, have to constantly compromise and learn how to do that. And when we needed to get other people's votes, it was us that had to take that over, because we have those skills to draw in other people. The Greens might have gone into a smouldering mess. And it was actually something that we really strongly believed in. And I mean, our Prime Minister, even though we had some in our party who weren't all that happy, Helen gave the lead very strongly on that.
I talked to Gordon Copeland. He said that was one of the main issues why he eventually left United Future.
Yeah.
So it was a very divisive issue.
Very divisive issue. And again, I was so angry, and actually had it in my van the other day with an older Labour voter who came to tell me he was absolutely appalled by it. And I was so angry because it was called the anti-smacking bill, and that was so wrong. It was, as a teacher, I used to have the right to hit children, and I got that right by an exemption from the assault charges in the crimes bill. That exemption was what we removed that from teachers. We were then removing that defence from parents. It was not necessarily saying thou shalt not smack, because parents do when a kid leaps out in front of a truck or something, or puts their hand on the stove. Those sorts of things. And so it was portrayed that way, and it was really played in, and it hasn't happened that way at all in actuality. And in those times you just have to weather and let the reality of the legislation come into play. What you don't do is do one of those campaigns just within 2 weeks of an election.
You mentioned that smaller parties have sort of a disproportionate amount of power, although the original goal of MMP, I think, was to truly represent the people, so that representation truly was proportional. Do you think, in some sense, that MMPs failed in that regard?
I just think they have a power sometimes bigger than the proportion. If they have holding 6% of the vote, their power seems to me to feel more than 6%. It's sometimes like a 20% that they're able to muscle and influence. And you have to be very careful, because you've got to remember the broad brush of people who are supporting you and who don't like that particular group, of whichever group it is. You know, they mightn't like New Zealand First on immigration, so I'll have a whole lot of people out there who won't like them because of that. So why are you working with them? Or they won't like the Greens because they see them as too black and white on some issues. So that it's that sort of thing. Yeah, so I think, but on the other hand, I can remember voting in elections in the 70s when there was a party called, I think it was called the Social Democratic Party or something. No, it wasn't called Social Democratic.
Social Credit?
Social Credit, that was it. And they got 20% of the vote and no one in the House. 20% of the vote. 1/5 of New Zealanders were disenfranchised. Well, I'd much rather have 6% of the people get in a Green Party that can actually, on some issues, really shake and probably exert more than a 6% would. I'd rather have that than 1/5 of the people not have somebody represent them.
The 5% threshold level, do you think that is at the right level?
We have been thinking about that. Yeah, I think so. I think going to 10% would actually wipe most of the small parties out, and that would make it invalid and but useless, and would actually then depend on like ACT and like United Future on having one person who leads their party and wins a seat and brings in others, and that's a wee bit about personality politics. Whereas the Greens and New Zealand First, although Winston is absolutely Mr. Personality, the Greens, you are really voting for policy rather than one person holding on to the seat. So, long answer, but I think I'm quite happy for it to remain at 5% because it allows a party to actually get there without actually holding a seat.
Okay. Cool, 2 more questions. Winston Peters is frequently being called Kingmaker. Do you think that is a fair appraisal?
Yes. Quite bluntly, yes it is. And he'll play it either way this coming time as well.
What if, I've been looking at the latest polls and it doesn't look like New Zealand First will be crossing the threshold. Do you think?
I think that I personally think that they will get through the next budget, and after that budget has been secure and their promises, their bargaining chips have been met, you'll watch them split away and disagree with us much more often. It'll be very hard to get legislation through, and they'll grandstand. All of them will do it, all the minor parties, to distinguish themselves from us. The last 2 or 3 months will be very, very hard work, and I'm not quite sure whether we'll hold it together.
So by hold it together, are you talking about?
We'll hold the numbers together to get much legislation through post the budget.
But confidence and supply, you'll still have that.
Just, I think. I wouldn't count on it.
Well, I don't think anybody would call for breaking up Parliament right before everybody knows an election is due anyway. So.
People might force, so they will try, and I think we'll see a real slowing down of legislation going through. And there'll be enormous battles and compromises, and there'll be a lot of grandstanding. And it will be because one of the things of a coalition government is that the smaller parties get swallowed up. So they have to come out and stretch their wings and show that they are independent and they have an independent voice, and therefore vote for us.
That's actually kind of interesting in that we interviewed Nandor, whose last name is very easy to mispronounce for me. And he mentioned that if there was one thing he could change, he would probably consider having longer periods in between elections, because it seems like the first year everybody's
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree. The Brits have 4 to 5, you have 4, I personally want 4. I'm a political scientist by training, and I like 4. It gives you time. It is, you spend 1 year trying to negotiate, 1 year in government, and 1 year lobbying for the next lot.
Well, you mentioned that people, that right after the last budget passes, there's about a year of everybody gearing up for politics, and it's harder to get anything done.
Well, it won't be a year. The last budget will pass in May. It'll be passed by end of June, mid-July. It's after that. It's 3 or 4 months after that that'll be hard yakka. So it's not, but it's just that it's very hard to get new stuff up and running in that particular period of time.
Again, about the polls, and just to give you my own biases, I'm not happy with it, but there was a poll that said that National, if the election was held today, National would get 51% of the vote.
Yeah.
Do you think that's...
I don't believe it will happen that way. I believe that's a midterm analysis. When people come down to it, they won't give that amount of power to any party. I think that's one of the things that's happened in New Zealand. And the minor parties will play for that absolutely loud and clear. Now, what will happen is that the minor parties of New Zealand First and ACT will say, give me a part of that vote, of that right-wing vote. Ensure that I'm here as a brake on them, otherwise they'll go and do all the things. It's the same thing that they say. The Greens will say, if we were in the ascendancy, the Greens would say, give us a vote and we'll keep them green, we'll keep them there. In fact, the Greens will probably lose votes, although what we do is try and give them some space, because what we know is that we will need another party.
Do you think, is that like a major worry that the Greens might not get a seat?
Yes, it always is a worry, yes, absolutely, and it was with the Alliance as well, and they split apart all over the place. So you have to be able to ensure that that's there, that you have other parties and that you are open to working with people, which with all due credit to Helen, the Prime Minister, it's her ability to do deals has been quite amazing, to get a government together and to hold on to it. It's quite stunning, because they used to have some huge fights in the previous ones.
You mentioned New Zealand First as a centrist party. Back in 1996, however, did you think that they would go with National?
They were new, and there were a lot of Māori MPs in there. I was stunned when they went to National. I had a presumption, which now, when I look back on it, was probably pretty stupid of me, but I had a presumption that there'd be an awful lot of people with a strong social conscience, and that they wouldn't necessarily have gone to National. But they did. Except the thing is, of course, you've got to also remember that their leader was a member of the National Party. I mean, so it's sort of like Anderton, who had been part of Labour. His heart and soul is closer to them than it was to us. But and I don't think that's changed. It's just the way that we work.
Do you think the voters back in 1996, do you think that they would have voted differently if they had known for certain that that New Zealand First would have gone to National?
I think they might have, but I don't know that. I can't prove that. The only thing that does that in a certain degree was that when they all collapsed, the New Zealand First vote went down quite badly. But then New Zealand First have played, and has United have done this thing saying, we will go to the party first that has the biggest number of votes. So they've made that commitment to their people, so that this time they would go and work with Labour. But if they didn't get what they wanted from Labour, then they'd go and negotiate with Nats, and they'd make that quite public. They've made it far more transparent, and that's quite good.
Do you think that actually has, and this is important, hurt ACT and hurt the Greens, because
Yes.
supporters are, yeah.
I think it does. I think that if you're on the edges, it's much harder. The only thing that's slightly for the Greens is that they are green, and they have that philosophy around environment, and because of that is sort of stronger than the economic kind of philosophy that ACT espouses, or the individualistic philosophy. I think that because it is a green one, it's international, and the issues are very real, that therefore they're not going to disappear or be absorbed. They're quite distinct. They're an international movement.
And but I mean, like, this is a major strategy by, saying, that the party is going to go for whoever gets the largest number of votes. If you're a centrist party, saying that will hurt extremist parties on both ends.
Yes, it will.
Well, not extremist, but extreme parties.
The edge parties.
The
yeah.
edge parties,
Yeah.
and by if you knock one of those out, then you're almost forcing the major parties to deal with you.
Yes. Yeah. And that's I think it's been hard for the Greens because they wouldn't deal necessarily with the Nats. And so they either deal with this, and they're kind of like the girl on the edge of the dance floor, sort of holding a bunch of flowers out, saying "Pick me." They're pretty vulnerable. They haven't, yeah.
Do you think if National, in a hypothetical, Michael Cullen has been abducted by aliens situation where they moved further to the center?
Yes, it is possible then, but that would be very, very interesting. Yeah, it is a possibility then that the Greens would talk to them more, because the Green movement is not, and it's very interesting. The Greens, as they are currently made up here in New Zealand at the moment, have quite a bit of social democratic concern about child poverty and foreign affairs issues, as well as straight environmental issues. But there are some Greens who are straight environmentalists and with less of a concern around social justice. So they might say, as was said actually in a debate about greenhouse gases, look, it would be wrong for us to put on a carbon charge and then to give to the old people who are in their homes and it's cold some tax relief or something, because that means they wouldn't change their behaviour. That's a very pure Green statement, and parts of Labour will say, hang on a minute, we are not having old people cold, you know, and so we'll have to find a way around that. So so Greens can sometimes be green and not. The social justice isn't quite so strong. So that's when they could go over to Nats. Unusual, I don't think it would happen actually in New Zealand, but it's there. You had 2 more questions.
They've already been answered actually.
Okay,
Yeah.
dear.
Thank you very much for that.
That's good.
Okay. I don't think I have anything unless you. By the time we get this edited, it will be 15 years of the MMP system. Yeah. Is there any trailing comment that you'd like to add?
It'll be 15. We'll have done 15 years of MMP. Heavens, no. Except I think we have to constantly keep looking to the rules of the House and how we work. We have shared out more chairs of select committees. We've got to keep watching, and I think that our public are really have learned quite a lot. They do know they have 2 votes. They do understand that now.
There's I'm sorry. I know that was supposed to be the final thing, but I did remember 2 questions.
Go for it.
You mentioned earlier that the media have kind of pitted like bad
adversarial. Yep.
Do you think that the media that there's more grist for the media mill now that there's more parties?
The media don't actually play the minor parties anywhere near as strongly as they might, because it takes away from the battle of the giants. The battle of the giants is simplistic and easy. It's far more sophisticated to actually talk your way through, or otherwise they'll portray the minor parties in terms of personalities, not in terms of their policies.
Okay. And the other question I forgot. And that's going to haunt me because I don't want to keep you, waiting while I try to think of the question. Helen, are you telepathic? Can you remember? No. Oh yes. If is there anything that you would change about MMP?
I might look. At the moment, as our population grows, the proportion of people from the list is lowering, and I'm not quite sure whether we've thought in the future as what we might do in the ratio between the list MPs versus the others. I think that we have to work carefully around the rules associated with supporting list MPs, because remember the elected MPs have much more resources than the list MPs do. But I think that may change gradually as parties use them differently.
Okay. Well, I think we're ready to wrap. So
Okay.
let me just sync up the audio. And
Thank you.